Most leaders are attempting to make something happen in the world, and so there's intrinsic challenges in the world that you're going to have to grapple with. There may not necessarily be an interest in the leader in values so much as there is in outcomes. And so in that sense, the leadership is driven much more by the task than particular values, though the person themselves might have values, but they may be personal as opposed to related to their formal role. And so in that sense, the values may be tacit as opposed to explicit. They're sitting there. People do believe in things, but they may not use what they believe in their leadership. So trust is very important in leadership. People aren't going to cooperate with you if you don't act with with integrity. In other words, if you say one thing, do another, at some point you've lost their trust because they feel like you can't be counted on. So integrity is first and foremost a kind of a character, that people have character that people can trust, that they are thoughtful, they're responsible, they're conscientious, they tell the truth, they're humble about their, they don't over-present their competencies. And to some extent that there is the walk and the talk line up. The values are in place really to achieve certain outcomes in the world, trying to leave something in place that is better than where they started. No, it can be a collective or shared values across many different people. And typically leaders are entwined with movements of one kind or another, followers. So in that sense, the values are held by multiple persons and possibly over multiple generations. There have been movements where you have successive leaders, but they would not necessarily have identical values, but you could see a strong lineage in the values. And again, principles and values they're not usually set in stone. There is some evolution and change in terms of how they get applied, how they get interpreted, and things like that over time. But there would still be a strong kind of link back to some of the original leaders typically. It can be cultivated in people. In other words, it would be very common in various sort of leadership circles to have development programs for young or new leaders. In politics it's quite common. It's quite common in some religious circles and so on. Because there's a recognition that we need leaders and we need to grow them. And so we are looking to strengthen people's capacities to do some task in leadership, whatever it might be. And so people are often recruited into various kinds of intentional leadership development schemes of one kind or another. And often people seek out some kind of leadership development support in themselves. And that may not be so much joining a program of leadership development as they might kind of study the work of somebody, perhaps remotely by reading and that sort of thing, talking to people that knew the person, or they might actually be a kind of apprentice to a person in one form or fashion, almost in some cases almost like an acolyte, Again, since leadership challenges are often shared, you might have a mix of different types of leaders that each bring something to the table that strengthen everybody's leadership because they're bringing different capacities to bear. People often say that everyone can be a leader, but really I think there are people that first of all, don't want to be leaders. They're quite happy to be a follower or simply support other leaders. So there are also effective leaders that don't have a formal leader role. And so they often have to make leadership happen and influence things outside of the formal structure of leadership. And in a society or a corporation or a bureaucracy. And so they, in a sense, provide leadership, but not via a formal leadership role. So it wouldn't be unusual, for instance, in a management team in a corporation that somebody that's not the CEO is doing all the heavy lifting in terms of leadership. And without them, they wouldn't be able, that person, they wouldn't be able to do it. So they're providing the leadership, but they are not in the formal recognized leader role. Sort of the power behind the throne, for instance, or the brains behind the operation where the real leadership came. So that's why it's important the two words are important, leadership versus leader. And leader does not equate with necessarily providing leadership. And many people providing leadership aren't recognized formally as leaders. Leadership can be expressed in a myriad of ways. And by a myriad of people may have a leadership contribution of a sort. And it may not always be a permanent role for people. It may be a temporary moment of leadership. So the idea that you're sort of a leader for all time and place, I think, is a misconception.